Hey guys, it's Chris, and this is my tort liability presentation. A tort is any actionable or civil wrong that has been committed by one person against another. So when we talk about tort liability, we're talking about who is going to be responsible for the consequences of the actions, or who's going to be responsible for taking care of those torts. And so in order for a teacher or a school to be found negligent or guilty of some sort of assault, four things need to be proved. The first one is that they need to prove that there has been a poor standard of care, that any reasonable person would have been able to do better, take or have better care for. A breach of the staff's duty has to be proved. Proximity, or meaning that the harm has occurred due to a direct result of a failure to act on the part of the staff, or you have to be able to prove how foreseeable the incident would have been. And finally, an injury has to have occurred. And so I chose 5 different torts that I thought would be a good, diverse set of cases that might happen in schools, and I thought it was a really good exercise as far as my own personal recollection or thoughts as to what would be good preventative measures and what would be good reactive measures for each of them. So here we go. My first tort case was that a teacher takes a personal cell phone call during a particularly rowdy day at school with students that have a history of violence in their school, and while the teacher's out of the room, one of the students is injured by another student. So why was this case bad? In this case, the teacher had a breach of duty when they left the classroom to take a personal phone call on their cell phone. It's posted in our teacher manual as far as policies about not allowing personal phone calls during student contact unless there's an emergency, and in the event of an emergency, coverage does need to be insured by the teacher. So obviously the teacher had a breach of duty there. The incident was foreseeable because there was a history of violence in the classroom, and that day happened to be a particularly rowdy day, and there was an injury that occurred to the student. So it meets all 4. So as far as a reactive measure that would take place in our school, if this were to happen, would be the students that were involved, both the victim and the perpetrator of the violence, would be removed from the classroom. Parents would need to be contacted as far as what happened at school. And then the teacher would need to be reprimanded for their conduct with the cell phone use, which is a breach of their duties. So how could this be prevented in the future? An annual review of the handbook policies, specifically in reference to personal phone calls, should be had every year. And if a teacher does have an emergency and does need to take a personal phone call, which happens, they need to make sure that they have coverage for their classroom while they're out of the room. Okay. Second tort case was that a teacher requires students as a form of discipline to take down decorations at the end of the year, and also has them use chairs instead of ladders or step stools. And while the students are helping, or while the students are being required to help, one of the students falls and injures themselves. So why is this bad? If a student was volunteering to help a teacher and then the student chose to use the chair, there might be an argument to be made for an implied risk that was assumed by the student for standing on the chair. But because the teacher is requiring the students to help and they're not volunteers, and because the teacher didn't provide them with proper safety equipment, such as a step stool or ladders, then you can't use that argument. So you can say that there was a breach of duties by the teacher also because the decorations in the classroom, taking down decorations at the end of the year is a duty of the teacher, not of the students. And so requiring them to take part in their duties is a breach of their duties. And the incident was foreseeable because we receive annual trainings on slips, trips, and falls that refer to the proper usage of ladders or step stools and not to use chairs, and so allowing or even requiring students to use chairs to help would be a breach of that as well. And obviously there was an injury that occurred. So what would we do as a reaction to this? Obviously we would need to treat the injuries of the child first and foremost. You'd need to inform parents about the injury. And then again, you would need to reprimand that teacher for not providing proper equipment for the students, and also for using one of their teacher duties, which is taking down decorations, as a punishment for students. So basically using students to take care of their duties. So how could this be prevented? You would need to instruct teachers on how to properly handle their duties. Make sure that if you are going to use students in some specific cases, that the students are volunteers, and that if they are volunteers, you're providing them with the proper equipment to assist you. And then finally, you would need to make sure that the duties that you are asking of them, or they're volunteering to do, don't involve hazardous or dangerous situations. So you would just need to make sure that those are handled in the proper way. My third tort was a tricky one because it involves a student with special needs and a paraeducator. So in this case, a paraeducator locks a student in a designated room during an emotional outburst. The room doesn't have windows, and the room is locked so that the student cannot exit the room. And to add on to that, the student was left in there through their lunch period and wasn't provided for lunch through the day. So this one's a little sticky because it involves a student with special needs, and therefore it's possible that the IEP of the student does allow for the student to be put into a secluded area in which they can calm down in a safe environment where they're not a danger to themselves or others. However, you are not allowed to lock those rooms so that they are not able to escape in the event of an emergency. So also, by the paraeducator being the one that enforced this instead of a certified staff, there could be a breach in duties there because they may not have the same standard of care that a certified teacher does. They may not have the same level of training that a special education teacher has as far as how to handle students with high special needs. And anytime you're dealing with a student that requires restraint, you need to make sure that people are properly trained in how to restrain students if they're being a danger to themselves or others. So, and then finally, the not allowing of food for the student is a big no-no as well, because you must always allow for a student a reasonable opportunity to have school lunch. So what would be a reactive measure? In this case, there may have to be an investigation that takes place to see if the actions of the para could constitute assault, possibly. If the student felt threatened by the actions of being locked in the room, it's possible that the student has claustrophobia. It's also possible that this particular student doesn't have seclusion as a part of their IEP, and so then again you would be not following through on your duties to the student. So you would need to thoroughly investigate that, and then if you would need to have a review of the student's IEP if there is seclusion to make sure that there is a safe location for that student that doesn't require a locked door where a student couldn't escape in the event of an emergency. So preventative measures that could have been taken to prevent this would have been to make sure that a highly trained staff is with the student at all time, and that if, especially if restraint is required of the student, somebody that is trained in restraint needs to be with that student at all times. And make sure that anybody that comes into contact with the student on a regular basis is very familiar with the IEP of the student. My fourth case involves a teacher during recess duty. A teacher routinely allows students to play a dodgeball-style game with basketballs during recess. during one of the recesses, a student is struck in the head with a basketball and gets a concussion. So this is bad because it is not a proper use of the equipment by the students, which is really the teacher's responsibility, because if it's something that's routinely happening, then it's the teacher's responsible as recess monitor to ensure that proper equipment is being used. It's foreseeable because any experienced teacher would know that dodgeball style games are, by their nature, a little violent, and using basketballs, which are much harder than dodgeball style game or balls, wouldn't be the proper use of technology. And so I think that this would be a violation. So the reactive measures that we'd have to take would be, you'd have to handle the medical emergency first and foremost, contact EMS if that's required, contact parents and make sure that student is taken care of. Then you'd need to have a meeting with all the students to make sure that they're using the equipment properly during recess, and just a review of all the recess rules and how to be safe. And then how you could prevent this in the future would be to stress the proper use of recess equipment and reinforce the duties of the staff during recess to make sure that they're taking care of the students and keeping them in a safe environment. And my last tort case involves an administrator that requires students to remain outside the elementary building as they wait for a bus to take them to their middle school or high school, even during poor weather conditions. And as a result, one of the students got frostbite in some of their toes. And so I chose this one because this was actually an issue that came up at my personal school, where our district allows for our school, which is an elementary building, to be the official drop-off point for several parents that have their students bused to the middle school or the high school. And so because we are a designated location, it's the administrator's responsibility to ensure a safe environment free of the weather conditions for those students. So obviously there was a clear violation of the duties when they're not allowing them to come inside during extreme heat or extreme cold temperatures. And so some reactive measures that would need to take place in this case, and did take place when this happened in our building. You'd need to provide a safe location indoors, or at least in a temperature-controlled location that has some sort of monitoring, either by the administrator themselves or by some volunteer staff. And so how could this be prevented? Maybe the administrator could contact parents to make sure that they have a very familiar understanding with the expectations of their students while they're at the school, as far as where they need to go for location and the time that they're allowed to be there. And so all of these torts could have been prevented by proper professional ethics. And so I think that it's a good reminder for teachers to remember that we as teachers have a special relationship with our students. We are operating in loco parentis, which means in the place of parents. So we need to treat them as if they're our own children, with regards to providing them with a safe environment for both their physical and their emotional well-being. And we're providing a high level of care because we are trained professionals in providing care. So just remembering that and maintaining high ethics and thinking about, if this were my child, how would I want them to be treated and taken care of, is a good way to operate. And so there you have it. Those were my 5 tort cases that I had, and I hope you have a great day and enjoy the rest of your summer.